Tonight, we retell a story you think you know. A myth passed down as a tale of tragic love. But it was never about love. It was about pride. For centuries, the story has been told of Apollo, the golden god of the sun, perfect and adored, and Daphne, a nymph who wanted nothing more than the silence of her forest. We are told a god fell in love, but the truth is, a god was cursed, and his obsession became her nightmare. So before you call this a romance, ask yourself, what happens when a god refuses to be told no? Like the video, subscribe. Because tonight, we are not telling a love story. We are telling the story of a hunt. And the moment a woman chose to become a tree rather than a trophy, before the heartbreak, before the chase, before a god learned the meaning of grief, there was pride. And that pride was born in a cloud of poison at the center of the world. Delphi was not yet a place of whispers and prophecies. It was a wound in the earth, a chasm of rock and shadow where something ancient slept. The python. It was older than the gods of Olympus, a child of Gaia herself, its coils wrapped around the planet's heart. Its breath was a plague, its hiss could sour rivers, and its presence kept the world from dreaming. Mortals did not climb this mountain. They feared the silence, a silence born of venom and shadow. But Apollo was no mortal. He arrived not with thunder or armies, but as a sliver of sunlight piercing the gloom. His golden hair seemed to burn against the oppressive dark, his lyre silent on his back, his silver bow clutched in a hand that had never known failure. The great serpent stirred from its slumber, disturbed not by sound, but by light. It rose from the chasm, scales shimmering like 1,000 pieces of obsidian armor, its eyes yellow and slit, holding no intelligence, only hunger. A forked tongue tasted the air and found the scent of godhood, an unwelcome warmth in its cold world. The beast roared, a sound like mountains grinding together, and lunged. But Apollo was motion. He was grace. He sidestepped the crushing weight of its coils, his feet barely touching the poisoned ground. He drew his bow, the string singing a single, perfect note. The first arrow, a dart of pure sunlight, struck the beast's hide and glanced off with a screech of metal on stone. The python recoiled, surprised, its massive head whipping around to spew a river of black venom. Apollo leapt clear, the poison dissolving the rock where he had stood only a moment before. He fired again, and again, each arrow finding a chink, a space between the impenetrable scales. He moved like a dancer, a musician playing a deadly song, his arrogance growing with every shot that flew true. He was the god of light, and this creature was nothing but a relic of a darker age. The final arrow, brighter than all the rest, flew into the serpent's open maw as it lunged one last time. It pierced through the back of its throat, and the great beast shuddered, its mountain-like body collapsing, shaking the very foundations of Delphi. As the black blood of the python soaked into the earth, Apollo stood over its corpse, chest heaving not from exhaustion, but from exhilaration. His laughter echoed like bronze striking marble. He had cleansed the world. He had conquered darkness. In that moment, standing in the silence that followed the monster's death, he felt truly invincible. He was Apollo, the slayer, the master of Delphi, a god with no equal, and he was wrong. Far from the echoes of dying monsters and proud gods, a different kind of quiet lived. It breathed in a forest so deep and green that the sun did not fall, but seeped through the canopy in soft, dappled pools. This was the sanctuary of Daphne. She was a nymph, born of the river, but her soul belonged to the earth, to the ancient bark of oaks and the silent language of ferns. She moved through the undergrowth, not like a visitor, but like a secret the forest kept. Her hair was a tangle of wild oak brown, her skin held the pale green tint of new leaves, and her eyes watched the world with a stillness that animals understood. Deer did not startle at her approach. Birds would sometimes land upon her shoulder, mistaking her for a moss-covered branch. She lived in a state of willful solitude, not because she was lonely, but because she was complete. The whispers of the wind through the pines were her counsel, the steady rhythm of a woodpecker, her music, the company of a curious fox, her only conversation. She had seen the way other nymphs were pursued, their beauty a cage they could not escape. She had heard stories of gods whose love was a fire that consumed, leaving only ash and tragedy behind. Daphne wanted no part of it. Her heart was promised not to a suitor, but to a vow. She was a follower of Artemis, the virgin huntress, the goddess of the moon and the untamed wild. In Artemis, Daphne saw a reflection of her own spirit, fierce, free, and utterly her own. Her prayers were not spoken in temples of cold stone, but whispered to the moon through the latticework of branches. She pledged to remain unwed, unchained, a creature of the forest forever. Her father, the river god, despaired at her choice, but Daphne was unswayed. To her, love was a trap, marriage a tether, and the touch of a man, mortal or god, a violation of the sacred peace she had built for herself. Here, in the heart of her green world, she was sovereign, she was safe. The distant tremors of a god's victory at Delphi did not reach her here. Her world was small and perfect and entirely her own, and she would have given anything to keep it that way. On Olympus, the gods celebrated. Nectar flowed in golden streams, and the sound of lyres, not yet Apollo's, filled the marble halls with songs of victory. They toasted the slayer of the python, the new master of Delphi, the god of light who had scoured a shadow from the world. But in a forgotten courtyard, where overgrown vines still held the morning dew, sat Eros. He was not among the revellers. His power was not in the slaying of monsters or the shaking of mountains. His was the power of the tiny spark that topples empires, the whisper that silences armies, the quiet, unseen wound that changes the course of history. And he felt a tremor. It was not in the earth, but in the very fabric of the cosmos. A shockwave of pure arrogance, radiating from Apollo, so bright and loud it drowned out everything else. It was a blinding golden noise, and it created an imbalance. The world could not bear so much pride in one place without a corresponding measure of humility. And so Eros worked. He was not the god of grand weapons. His forge was a simple stone bench, his tools a set of delicate files and polishing cloths. Before him lay 2 arrows. One was crafted from the wood of an ash tree, kissed by the sun. its fletching made from the feathers of a dove. Its tip was the sharpest, purest gold, enchanted to ignite a desperate, all-consuming fire in the heart of the first person it struck. The other arrow was different. It was heavy, made from the wood of a yew tree grown in shadow. Its feathers were from the wing of a grey owl, and its tip was blunt, dull, and made of lead. This arrow did not ignite passion. It extinguished it, leaving behind a cold and profound disgust, a revulsion so deep it felt like a law of nature. He took a smooth river stone and began to sharpen the golden tip, not with anger, but with purpose. The sound was a soft, rhythmic scratching, a whisper against the distant celebration. Each stroke was a correction, a rebalancing of the scales. A pride as monumental as Apollo's could not be broken by force. A god who believed himself invincible could not be humbled by a stronger arm or a sharper spear. No, he had to be taught a different kind of lesson, a lesson in wanting, a lesson in loss. And that kind of lesson was always delivered with the smallest of wounds. The river was her father, and it knew when she was near. Daphne came to the water's edge not as a child visiting home, but as one wilderness paying respect to another. She knelt and dipped her hands into the cool, clear current, feeling the steady, ancient pulse of the god Peneus. His voice was not a sound in the air, but a vibration in the stones, a deep and steady current that spoke directly to her soul. "My daughter," she did not answer, but she listened. The reeds along the bank swayed, and the water swirled around her fingers, a gentle but insistent touch. "You are of age." Other nymphs have found suitors, gods, and men who build them shrines of flowers and promise them eternity. But you remain alone. The word hung in the air, heavy and sad. To him, her sanctuary was a prison of her own making. He saw her solitude not as strength, but as a lack, an emptiness that pained his immortal heart. "Daphne," he murmured, his voice the sound of water flowing over smooth rocks. "Your beauty is a song the world wishes to hear. Must you spend your days in silence? I dream of seeing your children, small and bright like pebbles, skipping stones across my surface. Give me this gift. Let me see your line continue." Daphne finally drew her hands from the water and stood. Her face was calm, her resolve as unmoving as the oldest trees in her forest. "Father," she said, her voice clear and firm, "the peace you call silent is the only language I wish to speak. My heart belongs to the huntress of the moon, to Artemis. I have sworn an oath to her, a vow of chastity, to remain as wild and untethered as she. The other nymphs may have their suitors, but I have my freedom. Your grandchildren would be an honor, but they would be the links in a chain I do not wish to wear." A long silence followed, broken only by the lapping of the water against the shore. The river sighed, a long, slow sound of water pulling back from the bank. Peneus did not argue further. He knew the stubbornness of the earth was in her spirit. "I worry for you, my child. That is all." She gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of his love, and turned her back on the water. As she walked toward the trees, her resolve was now hardened like old stone. Feeling more certain than ever of the path she had chosen, she would not be won. she would not be caught. Apollo, still wearing his victory like a cloak woven from sunlight, strode through the halls of Olympus. The praise of the other gods was still ringing in his ears, a sweet music that fed the fire of his pride. He was Apollo the Radiant, Apollo the Slayer, Apollo the Unrivaled. He felt the need to walk, to let his divine energy expand beyond the confines of the throne room. His path took him to a quiet, forgotten corner of the mountain, a small courtyard where a lesser god sat in solitude. It was Eros. The god of love did not look up as Apollo's golden light fell across his workbench. He was focused, carefully polishing the tip of a small, delicate arrow. Apollo stopped, a slow, amused smile spreading across his perfect face. He looked at the tiny bow resting against the bench, then at the quiver of arrows that looked more like toys than weapons. "What is this, little one?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescending warmth. "Are you playing at being a warrior?" Eros paused his work, his hands perfectly still. He did not look up. Apollo chuckled, a sound that was too loud for the quiet space. He gestured to the silver bow still slung across his own back. "This," he said, patting it proudly, "is a bow for a god. This is an instrument of consequence. It has just slain the great python of Delphi and cleansed the world of a primal darkness." He then pointed a dismissive finger at Eros's work. "And what of your little darts? What great deeds do they accomplish? Do you use them to prick the hearts of shepherds and milkmaids, to start lovers' quarrels? Leave the art of archery to those who understand its true power, child. A bow is for felling monsters, not for playing games." Eros slowly placed the golden arrow down. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes, though youthful, held an unnerving stillness, an ancient and patient weight. "Your bow may be great, Lord Apollo," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "But this bow is mine, and its arrows find their own marks." Apollo simply laughed, shaking his head as if at the stubbornness of a foolish child. He turned and walked away, his golden light receding from the courtyard, leaving Eros once more in the soft grey light of the afternoon. Eros watched him go, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up the golden arrow once more. He looked at its razor-sharp tip, and for the first time that day, he knew exactly whose heart it was meant for. The laughter faded, but the insult remained, hanging in the quiet air like a poison. It settled in Eros's heart, not as a hot, roaring fire, but as a sliver of ice. Pride. Apollo was drowning in it, a golden sickness of the soul. A god who believed his arrows were the only ones of consequence had forgotten a fundamental truth. The greatest wounds are not the ones that kill the body. They are the ones that break the heart. Eros did not shout. He did not break anything. He simply rose, his small wings beating a silent, determined rhythm against the air. He ascended, leaving the marble halls of Olympus behind, climbing higher and higher until the world of gods and men was a tapestry below him. He landed on the bare, wind-swept peak of Mount Parnassus, a needle of stone that touched the clouds. From here, he could see everything. He could see the forests where the nymphs danced, the rivers where the gods slept, and the golden, shining figure of Apollo, still wandering the earth, basking in the glow of his own magnificence. Eros reached into his quiver. His fingers bypassed the ordinary arrows of simple affection and gentle courtship. He sought the two extremes, the two fates he held in his hand. First, he drew the arrow of gold. It shone with a light of its own, warm and hungry, its tip honed to a microscopic point. It was not a weapon of love, not truly. It was a weapon of obsession, a fever that would burn reason to ash and leave only a desperate, aching need in its wake. He laid it carefully on the cold stone. Then he drew the other. It was heavy in his hand, and it seemed to absorb the light around it. Its shaft was dark, its tip a lump of unpolished lead. This was the arrow of repulsion. It did not create hatred, for hatred is still a fire. No, this arrow created a void, an emptiness where affection was supposed to be, filling it with a cold, instinctual revulsion. It was the feeling of a shadow falling where the sun should be. He held one in each hand, the beginning and the end of a story that had not yet started. He looked down and saw Apollo, a brilliant, arrogant fool. Then his eyes scanned the green wilderness, searching. And there, a flicker of movement, a spirit of the forest, content in her solitude. A perfect target, a perfect tragedy. The lesson was ready. Apollo wandered in a daze of self-admiration. The world felt new, freshly made for him, a stage for his glory. The sun, his own chariot, seemed to shine brighter just for him, warming the earth in his honour. He walked along the edge of a dense forest, the kind of untamed place he had just cleansed the world of. He saw his reflection in a still pool and smiled, admiring the perfect lines of his face, the golden light that seemed to radiate from his very skin. He was a god at the peak of his power, complete and untouchable. It was then that he felt it, not a blow, not a piercing pain, but a tiny, sharp sting in his heart, no more than a mosquito bite. It was over, in an instant, but something had changed. A strange and sudden fire bloomed in his chest, a hollow ache that his victory could not fill. The world, once his perfect mirror, now seemed empty. His glory felt pointless, a song sung to an empty room. He felt a sudden, desperate need, a longing for something he could not name. What was this? This strange, sweet poison? He heard a sound then, a gentle splashing from within the deep woods. It was a sound he would have ignored a moment before, but now it pulled at him, a silken thread tied to his very soul. He pushed through the tangled branches, his divine light cutting beams through the emerald gloom, and then he saw her. In a small clearing, where the sunlight fell like a blessing, a nymph was bathing in a stream so clear it looked like liquid air. Her back was to him, her wild brown hair plastered to her skin, a single green leaf caught in its strands. She was not like the goddesses of Olympus, draped in jewels and performance. She was part of the forest, her skin the colour of pale river stones, her movements as natural as the water that flowed around her. The moment Apollo's eyes fell upon her, the golden poison in his veins ignited. The vague longing in his heart now had a face. Daphne. The world tilted on its axis. The sun, the sky, the mountains, his victory at Delphi, all of it faded to a meaningless backdrop. She was the new Sunday. She was the new center of his universe. A love so fierce and immediate it was more like madness seized him. It was not gentle. It was a burning, possessive fire, a divine hunger that demanded to be fed. He did not think to ask her name. He did not wonder at her thoughts. He only knew, with the absolute certainty of a god, that she would be his. Daphne felt a change in the air before she saw anything. It was a subtle shift, the kind only a creature of the forest would notice. The birdsong that had been her constant companion suddenly fell silent. The gentle hum of insects ceased. The very water of the stream seemed to grow still, its playful current slowing to a heavy, watchful calm. A prickling sensation crawled up her spine, the ancient instinct of prey that knows it is being watched. She froze, every muscle tensed. Slowly she began to turn. At that exact moment, something grazed her shoulder. It was a feeling so slight she almost dismissed it, like a dead leaf falling from a branch. There was no pain, no sting, no wound, but a coldness spread from the point of contact, a deep and unnatural chill that had nothing to do with the water. It was a coldness of the soul, a sudden, hollowing emptiness where her peace had been. Then she saw him. He stood at the edge of the clearing, a figure of impossible brightness, golden and perfect. The sunlight seemed to bend around him, as if he were its source. Objectively, she knew she was looking at something beautiful, something divine. The stories spoke of gods like this, beings of such radiance that mortals fell to their knees in awe. But the lead in her veins told a different story. As her eyes met his, a wave of revulsion so powerful it almost made her sick washed over her. It was instinctual, inexplicable, and absolute. His golden hair did not look beautiful. It looked garish. His perfect face did not seem handsome. It seemed like a flawless, empty mask. The light that radiated from him felt like a violation, a searing, arrogant heat that threatened to burn her quiet, green world to the ground. Every part of her being screamed a single silent word. Wrong. He was wrong. His presence was a blight on her sanctuary, an invasive noise in her perfect silence. She felt a desperate, clawing need to flee, to put as much distance as she could between herself and this shining, terrible thing. Before he even spoke a word, before he took a single step, her heart had become a block of lead, and it knew only one direction, away. He saw her flinch, saw the wild, cornered look in her eyes. But the golden arrow in his heart translated it all as simple awe. Of course, she was overwhelmed. He was a god, after all. A shy, lovely creature of the woods, stunned into silence by his divine presence. It was charming. It was perfect. He would soothe her fear. He would win her with the one gift no mortal, nymph or goddess could resist. His music. He lifted his hand, and his silver lyre materialized from the sunlight, humming with a power of its own. He did not see the forest as her sanctuary. In his love-struck eyes, it was now a stage. The trees, the columns of a temple dedicated to her beauty, the babbling stream, the perfect accompaniment to his song. He struck a single golden chord, and the sound hung in the air, a note so pure it made the very leaves on the trees tremble. The birds that had fallen silent now returned, not to sing, but to listen. A curious fawn peeked out from behind a thicket, mesmerized. Then he began to sing. His voice was not a sound, it was an enchantment. He sang of her hair, comparing it to the rich, dark earth from which all life sprang. He sang of her eyes, calling them twin pools of untamed wilderness. He sang of her skin, smoother than river stones and paler than the moon. It was a song of worship, but it was the worship of a god, possessive and absolute. It was a song that did not ask, but claimed. The forest responded. Flowers that were not yet in season began to unfurl their petals, their faces turning towards him. The air grew thick and sweet with the scent of honeysuckle and wild rose. To Daphne, it was a nightmare. The beautiful melody was not a song. It was a net of golden threads tightening around her with every note. His divine voice was a cage of sound, each word a bar locking her in. The sweet scent of the flowers was cloying, suffocating. She felt a primal terror grip her, the terror of a wild thing about to be trapped, tamed, and broken. She stood frozen, trembling, her mind screaming while her body refused to move. Apollo saw her trembling and smiled, his heart swelling with triumph. He saw her stillness not as fear, but as captivation. She was enchanted by his song, just as he knew she would be. He was winning. He played the final, lingering chord, letting it fade into the now adoring silence of the forest, and opened his arms, fully expecting her to run into his embrace. The final chord faded, and the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the taut, humming silence of a bowstring pulled back, ready to release. Apollo stood with his arms open, his perfect face alight with a triumphant smile, a god so certain of his own desirability that the outcome was not a hope, but a foregone conclusion. He waited for her to fall into his embrace, a prize already won. But the lead in Daphne's heart was heavier than his music. His song had been a cage, and his open arms were not an invitation. They were the closing of the door. The revulsion that had chilled her veins now shattered the paralysis of his enchantment. Thought was a luxury she did not have. There was only instinct, raw and absolute, the same instinct that tells a deer to bolt at the scent of a wolf, the same instinct that tells a bird to fly at the shadow of a hawk. Without a sound, without a cry, or a backward glance, she turned and ran. It was not a stumble or a retreat. It was an explosion of pure, desperate motion. She launched herself from the stream, her bare feet finding purchase on slick stones and soft moss as if they had eyes of their own. She did not run from him. She ran from the world he was trying to create around her, a world of golden cages and suffocating songs. She plunged into the densest part of the forest, into the tangled embrace of thorns and low-hanging branches that would have stopped a mortal man in his tracks. But this was her world. She was the forest, and it moved with her, its briars parting, its roots offering a foothold. Apollo's smile faltered, then crumbled. For a split second, a look of pure, uncomprehending shock crossed his face. Rejection. It was a concept so alien to him, so impossible, that his divine mind could not process it. He had offered her poetry, music, godhood. He had offered her himself, and she had answered with nothing but the frantic, fading sound of her footsteps. The shock lasted only a heartbeat, then it curdled into something else. The golden arrow in his heart did not allow for rejection, it only allowed for desire. And a desire that is denied, in the heart of a god, quickly becomes a hunt. He dropped his lyre, and it dissolved into motes of light as he took his first step to follow. The chase had begun. The forest was no longer her ally. It was a racetrack, and she was the desperate, fleeing prey. Apollo moved not like a man running, but like a river of light flowing through the trees. Where Daphne had to scramble over fallen logs and push through tangled vines, he simply glided, his divine form passing through obstacles as if they were mist. He was faster, he knew it, and at first he found her flight almost charming, a game of chase she was destined to lose. His voice followed her, not a shout, but a golden thread of sound that wrapped around the trees and found her ears no matter how she twisted or turned. "Wait," he called, his voice laced with a confusion that sounded almost like music. "Why do you flee from me? I am no monster, no rough shepherd from the hills. I am Apollo." He began to list his titles like gifts, offerings he was laying at her feet. "I am the Lord of Delphi, master of the lyre and the bow. I can show you the future. I can grant you a life that never fades. Come back to me, and I will make you a goddess. Your name will be sung in temples for all of time." But Daphne did not slow down. His words were not promises, they were chains. A goddess was still a possession, a temple was still a cage. Her only answer was the panicked pounding of her own heart, the desperate gasp of her breath. She pushed herself harder, her legs burning, her lungs screaming for air. Apollo's steps grew closer. The game was no longer amusing. Her silence, her continued flight, was an insult his pride could not endure. The warmth in his voice began to cool, the edges hardening like cooling metal. "Foolish nymph." His voice was sharper now, a lash instead of a caress. "Do you not know what you are refusing? I am the son of Zeus. The sun itself is my chariot. Do you think these paltry trees can hide you from me?" The promises twisted into threats. The serenade became a hunter's call. "Stop running," he commanded, and the word held the power of a god, a physical force that seemed to press against her back. "You cannot escape me. There is nowhere in this world you can run where my light will not find you." Her own body was betraying her. The initial burst of adrenaline, born of pure terror, had burned away, leaving behind an aching human weakness. Her lungs were twin fires, each breath a searing pain. Her legs, once so swift and sure among the trees, now felt like they were carved from heavy stone. Each step a monumental effort. Thorns she would have normally danced around now raked across her skin, drawing thin lines of blood she did not have the strength to feel. The forest, her home, had become a labyrinth of pain, and every path she took only seemed to lead to more exhaustion. Behind her, he was not tiring. She could feel his presence, not as footsteps, but as a constant, oppressive heat on her back, a relentless sun that offered no shade. His voice, no longer promising but commanding, still echoed in her ears, a golden net she could not outrun. She was failing. The realization hit her as she stumbled over an unseen root, her body crashing to the forest floor. For a single heart-stopping moment, she lay there, the smell of damp earth filling her senses, her will to rise momentarily extinguished. It was in that moment of absolute despair, with the light of her pursuer growing brighter through the trees, that she remembered she was not truly alone. She had a goddess. She had a vow. With no breath to speak, no time for ritual, she sent her prayer outward, not as words, but as a silent, desperate arrow shot from her soul. She aimed it at the sliver of blue sky visible through the canopy, a sky that belonged to both the sun and the moon. Artemis, lady of the hunt, mistress of the silver bow, she who runs with wolves, hear me. I am your maiden. I have kept my vow to you in the face of all persuasion. Now, I am the hunted. A brother of yours seeks to break me, to tame what I have sworn to keep wild. I do not ask for you to strike him down. I only ask for your strength. Grant me the speed of a frightened doe, that I might find purchase where there is none. Grant me the endurance of the huntress, that my lungs may find air and my legs may find fire. I am yours, Artemis. Do not let him claim me. She felt no sudden surge of divine power, no magical wind at her back. But something did answer. A flicker of resolve deep within her, a final defiant spark. It was the strength of her own faith, the iron will of the huntress she worshipped. It was enough. She pushed herself up, her limbs screaming in protest, and ran again, her prayer the only thing holding her together. The prayer had not given her wings. It had not turned her muscles to steel. It had given her just enough fire to keep from collapsing, a single candle flame against a hurricane. And it was not enough. Apollo was a god. He did not run on legs powered by blood and desperation. He moved with the effortless speed of light itself, a golden blur that flowed through the forest's obstacles as if they were nothing more than shadows. The distance between them, which her desperate prayer had momentarily widened, began to shrink again, rapidly, mercilessly. The chase entered a new, terrifying phase. It was no longer just the sound of his pursuit that haunted her, but the feeling of it. A palpable heat began to press against her back, a dry, scorching presence that felt like standing too close to a bonfire. The air around her grew thick and heavy, shimmering with a power that did not belong in the cool, damp sanctuary of the woods. Then came the scent. It was the scent of sunlight, but not the gentle warmth that nurtures new leaves. This was the scent of a lightning strike, of hot metal and ozone, a clean, sterile, and terrifyingly powerful smell that scoured the familiar earthy fragrance of pine and damp soil from the air. It was the scent of a being so pure, so potent, that its very presence was a poison to her wild world. She pushed through a wall of thorns, the sharp points tearing at her arms and legs, but the pain was distant, a dull echo compared to the overwhelming terror of the presence behind her. She could hear him now, not his voice, but the soft, inevitable hiss of his passage, the sound of divinity displacing mortal air. He was no longer trying to woo her. He was no longer trying to convince her. The game was over. This was a hunt now, and he was the predator, closing in for the final, inescapable moment. She risked a glance over her shoulder, and her heart seized. He was there, so close. Not running, but gliding, his face a mask of terrible, beautiful focus, his golden eyes fixed on her, burning with a light that was no longer love, but pure, undiluted possession. She could feel the warmth of his hand, just inches from her shoulder, a phantom touch that promised capture. The heat was no longer a threat, it was a reality. Daphne could feel the warmth of Apollo's fingers just an inch from the fabric of her tunic, a divine heat that promised capture in the very next heartbeat. Her legs were numb, moving on a memory of motion that was rapidly fading. The forest, once a complex tapestry of escape routes, had flattened into a single, terrifying path with no exit. She had lost. The prayer to Artemis had been answered with a final spark of defiance, but a spark is no match for the Sunday. In the silent space between one ragged breath and the next, as she prepared for the feeling of his hand closing on her shoulder, something changed. It was not a sound she heard with her ears, but a deep, humming vibration that resonated in her bones. A sudden coolness cut through Apollo's scorching presence, a whisper of damp air that smelled of wet stones and deep, moving water. The ground beneath her feet, though she was still deep in the woods, felt softer, yielding, as if it knew the touch of a riverbank. It was an echo of her beginning, an echo of her father, Peneus. The name was a prayer she didn't need to speak. It was a pull, an instinct buried deeper than fear. Her wild, aimless flight suddenly found a direction. With the last ounce of her will, she pivoted, her body swerving so sharply that Apollo's grasping fingers closed on empty air. She was no longer just running away from him. She was running towards something. She could feel it now, a steady, rhythmic pulse drawing her forward. The river, her father's domain, it was a desperate, foolish hope. What could a simple river god do against the son of Zeus, the radiant lord of the sun? But it was the only hope she had left. Water was the opposite of his fire. The cool, deep silence of her father's world was the only thing that could stand against the golden, screaming noise of his pursuit. She ran now not with the speed of a nymph, but with the homing instinct of a salmon fighting its way upstream. The pain in her lungs, the fire in her legs, it all became a distant roar. There was only one thing in her world now, the feeling of home, the promise of water, the final desperate sanctuary of the river. The chase was no longer a secret, whispered between the trees. It had torn through the quiet heart of the forest, and the world, in its small and hidden corners, had begun to watch. On a high meadow that bordered the woods, a young shepherd boy saw it first. He saw a flash of brown and white, a figure running with the desperate speed of a hunted animal. He thought it was a deer, startled from its rest, but then came the light, a golden presence that burned the very air, moving with a speed that was not of the earth. The boy's heart went cold. He was a mortal, and he knew the stories. He knew what happened when gods desired something. It was not love. It was a storm. Without a thought for his own curiosity, he blew a sharp, frantic whistle, gathering his flock of sheep, pushing them behind a rocky outcropping where they huddled together, trembling. He pressed himself against the cold stone, making himself small, praying that the terrible, beautiful light would pass him by. Deeper in the woods, a dryad, her skin the texture of bark, felt the chase as a vibration through the roots of her ancient oak. She peeked from behind the trunk and saw one of her own, a nymph of the river, her face a mask of pure terror. Behind her, the god of the sun, a being she had only ever felt as distant, life-giving warmth, was now a predator, his beauty twisted into something monstrous. The dryad felt a silent scream rise in her soul. She wanted to call out, to trip him with a root, to lead him astray, but she knew it was hopeless. To interfere would be to invite his wrath upon her own tree, her own life. With a grief that felt like a crack forming in her own wooden heart, she pressed herself back into the oak, melting into the bark, until she was indistinguishable from it, becoming just another silent, helpless witness. And on a sun-dappled rock, the god Pan, wild and bearded, was playing a joyful, chaotic tune on his pipes. The music was the sound of life itself, of Bempowder Yetu, of buzzing bees. As the desperate chase tore past his clearing, the melody faltered. The music stuttered, then stopped altogether. Pan, the lord of the wild, the very embodiment of the chase and of untamed desire, lowered his pipes from his lips. He watched the golden god and the fleeing nymph, and the mischievous grin that was always on his face faded away. For the first time in an age, the forest was silent, holding its breath. The world was watching a spectacle not of love, but of terror. The fire in Apollo's heart was no longer the brilliant, beautiful flame of a newfound love. The sweetness had curdled, turning sour and bitter on his divine tongue. The golden arrow was a strange and terrible magic. It did not gift him with understanding, or patience, or tenderness. It gave him only the fire of desire, a pure and blinding want. And a want, when it is denied in the heart of a god, does not become sadness, it becomes rage. He could not understand her flight. The concept was a jarring, ugly dissonance that his entire being recoiled from. He was Apollo. He was light and music and prophecy. He was perfection given form. Mortals built temples to catch a mere whisper of his glory. Goddesses vied for a single passing glance. And this nymph, this creature of mud and leaves, dared to run from him. It was more than a rejection. It was an impossibility, a flaw in the fabric of the cosmos that he felt a violent need to correct. Who was she to deny him? The thought echoed in the silent chambers of his mind, growing louder with every step she took away from him. The slayer of the python, the lord of Delphi, the son of Zeus himself, was being spurned by a fleeting, nameless thing. The indignity of it was a poison far more potent than the serpent's venom. The chase was no longer a game. Her fear was no longer a charming shyness to be soothed. It was an insult. The love, which had bloomed so suddenly and fiercely, now soured into a dark and terrible obsession. The need to hold her, to hear her voice, was replaced by a harder, colder need. The need to win. His divine ego, wounded and roaring, took command. This was no longer a pursuit. It was a conquest. She was no longer a desired love. She was a prize to be taken, a territory to be claimed, a will to be broken. His light, once a beacon meant to dazzle and attract her, now became a weapon, a scorching, relentless heat meant to exhaust her, to corner her, to burn away her defiance. He would not be denied. He would not lose. He would run her to the very ends of the earth if he had to, and he would have her not as a bride, but as a testament to the inescapable fact of his power. The forest had vanished. The world, once a sprawling sanctuary of green and brown, had shrunk to the space of a single ragged breath. There was no longer a path, no trees, no sky. There was only the fire in her lungs and the lead in her legs. Her body was a rebellion she could no longer command. Each gasp for air was a sip of liquid glass, a searing pain that offered no relief, only the promise of the next, even more agonizing breath. Her legs, once the swift and silent servants of her will, were now clumsy strangers, anchors of stone and mud that refused to obey. They moved on a memory of motion, a desperate, fading echo of the flight that had begun a lifetime ago. The ground seemed to reach up and grab at her ankles with every step, the forest floor itself conspiring with her pursuer. And he was there, not behind her, not any more. He was with her. She could feel him as a change in the very air she struggled to breathe. The scent of sunlight and ozone was overwhelming, a clean, terrifying perfume that signaled the end. She could feel his breath now, a warm puff of air against the fine hairs on her neck, a ghost of a touch that was more terrifying than any blow. It was the breath of the hunter over the fallen prey, a silent declaration of ownership. Time stretched and grew thin. In the space of a single, stumbling step, she could feel the heat radiating from his hand, a brand hovering just inches from her shoulder, a promise of the searing pain of his touch. This was it. The final moment, the inevitable capture she had run from, prayed against, and fought with every last shred of her being. Her mind was a white, silent scream. There were no more thoughts of Artemis, no more memories of her father's river, only the blinding, absolute certainty of the hand that was about to close upon her. The trees were no longer individual shapes, but a solid, rushing wall of green that blurred the edges of her vision. Her legs were not her own. They were clumsy, disobedient things, moving on a rhythm of their own, a frantic, failing drumbeat of pure survival. Her lungs were ragged, torn cloth, pulling in air that offered no relief, only fuel for the fire that was consuming her from the inside. The pull of the water was the only thing left, a phantom coolness in a world of heat and pain, a distant song she was running toward with the last echoes of her strength. And then she broke through. The forest ended as abruptly as a snapped thread, spitting her out from its tangled darkness into the sudden, shocking openness of the riverbank. The slap of open air on her sweat-soaked skin was a physical blow. Before her lay the river Peneus, not a raging torrent, not a mighty god, but a wide, slow, grey sheet of water, indifferent and calm. The momentum that had carried her for what felt like an eternity simply died. Her legs, finally given permission to fail, tangled beneath her. She did not fall so much as collapse. her body stumbling forward in a series of jarring, uncontrolled steps until she pitched forward, landing on her hands and knees in the soft, dark mud of the bank. The cool ooze of it against her hot skin was the first real sensation she had felt beyond pain in what seemed like a lifetime. She stayed there, head hanging, her breath coming in ragged, ugly sobs that tore at her throat. Her strength was utterly, completely gone. There was nothing left. She lifted her head, her gaze fixed on the slow, steady current of the water just a few feet away. It was her home, her sanctuary, an impossible distance. A shadow fell over her, blocking out the Sunday. It was followed by the scent of sunlight and victory, a clean, terrible perfume. She didn't need to turn around. She didn't need to look. He was there. The chase was over. There was nowhere left to run. She had reached her father's home, only to find it was her cage. The shadow that fell over her was not the gentle shade of a passing cloud. It was a solid thing, a weight that pressed down, stealing the air and the light. He was standing over her, his form a brilliant, golden silhouette against the sun he commanded. She did not need to see his face to know the expression it held, the final, terrible silence of victory. His voice, when it came, was not a roar of triumph, but a soft, possessive whisper that was somehow worse. I told you that you could not escape. His fingers, long and impossibly beautiful, reached for her shoulder. This was it. The moment she had run from, the touch that would brand her as his, the end of the wild, free thing she had fought so desperately to remain. As his skin brushed against hers, a jolt of pure violation, colder than any river, shot through her. It was not a touch of love, it was the touch of ownership, and it broke her. It shattered the last wall of her silent endurance. A sound tore from her throat, a ragged, raw cry that was not meant for him, but for the mud beneath her hands, for the water just beyond her reach, for the ancient sleeping God that was her father. The prayer was not a plea for rescue. It was a plea for oblivion. Father, help me. Her voice was a cracked and broken thing, a sound the forest had never heard from her before. She clawed at the soft earth, her knuckles digging into the mud, anchoring herself to his domain. He is here. He will take me. I cannot be what he wants. The final words were not a request, but a desperate final command to her own bloodline, a severing of the self. Change me. Destroy the beauty that has brought me this torment. Let him have nothing. Let me be nothing. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the finality of his grip, the strength that would lift her up and claim her. But instead, she felt something else. A deep, slow shudder in the earth beneath her knees. It was not a tremor of fear. It was a response. The slow, grey water of the river, for the first time in an age, stopped flowing. Apollo's fingers, glowing with the promise of capture, were just a hair's breadth from her skin when the change began. It did not start with a flash of divine light or a crack of thunder. It started with a feeling, deep in the earth. A slow, cold numbness crept into her toes, the same toes that had been bruised and bloodied by her desperate flight. But this was not the numbness of exhaustion. It was the numbness of belonging. She felt them stretch, burrowing down into the rich, dark mud of the riverbank, splitting and twisting as they sought purchase. becoming not feet, but roots. The cold spread, a slow tide rising up her ankles, her shins, her trembling legs, which had failed her so completely, now grew rigid, locking into place. The skin, so soft and pale, began to harden and darken, a rough, protective shell forming over her flesh. It was not painful. It was a release, a final, beautiful armor against the touch she so dreaded. Apollo watched, his hand frozen in mid-air, his face a mask of disbelief. The prize he was about to seize was dissolving before his very eyes, transforming into something he could not possess, something he could not even comprehend. The nymph was becoming part of the landscape, her form melting into the very earth she had run across. The bark crept upward, encasing her torso, her shoulders, her neck. Her arms, which she had thrown out in her final plea, lifted toward the sky. They stretched, elongating, growing thin and strong, splitting into smaller and smaller limbs until they were no longer arms but branches, her delicate fingers now fine, trembling twigs, reaching for the Sunday. And her hair, her wild, tangled hair that he had sung poems to, lifted on a sudden breeze. But it did not fall back down. In a silent green explosion, each strand thickened, flattened, and blossomed into 100 small, waxy, pointed leaves. The transformation was complete. Where a kneeling, weeping nymph had been only a moment before, now stood a slender, graceful tree, its new leaves rustling in a wind that had just been born. She was gone. Her fear, her pain, her wild spirit, all of it was now housed in silent, unmoving wood. Her prayer had been answered, she had been changed, and in doing so she had finally, truly escaped. The final leaf trembled into existence, a perfect, waxy green against the pale blue of the sky. The air, which had been humming with the energy of a god's rage and a nymph's terror, fell utterly silent. The world held its breath. For a frozen moment, Apollo's mind, a thing of divine speed and certainty, refused to process what it was seeing. The running, breathing, terrified prize he had hunted, the object of the burning fire in his heart, had vanished. In her place stood this silent, rooted thing, a creature of bark and leaf that offered no resistance, no fear, and no surrender. The rage that had fueled him, the wounded pride that had demanded conquest, still screamed for completion. His body, acting on the final, unchangeable command of the hunt, lunged forward to complete the embrace. His arms, which had been meant to close around a soft, trembling shoulder, to feel the frantic beat of a captured heart, closed instead around a trunk of rough, unyielding bark. The shock of it was a physical blow. His divine skin, which had never known an unwelcome touch, scraped against the coarse, living wood. He smelled not the scent of a frightened nymph, but the clean, green fragrance of crushed leaves and fresh sap. He pressed his ear against the trunk, listening, demanding to hear the life he had pursued. But there was no answering heartbeat. There was only the deep, slow, and utterly alien silence of a tree. The fire of the golden arrow in his chest did not die. Instead, it changed, the clean burn of desire choked by the thick, black smoke of loss. The conquest was over. He had won. He had caught her. and in his victory she was gone, taken from him not by a rival god or a twist of fate, but by her own will, transformed into something he could not threaten, could not woo, and could not possess. He held the tree, his arms wrapped around the body of his failure, his cheek pressed against the rough bark. The great god Apollo, slayer of the python, lord of the sun, stood on a muddy riverbank, embracing a tree. And for the first time in his eternal, glorious life, his prize was lost forever. His arms loosened their grip. He slid down the rough trunk, his divine form slumping to the earth as if the bones had been stolen from his body. He knelt in the mud at the foot of the tree, a golden, broken thing. The rage was gone. The pride was a shattered vessel. The fire of the golden arrow, once a beacon of desire, now burned with a new and terrible fuel, grief. It was an emotion so alien, so utterly foreign to his nature, that he did not at first recognize it. He only knew the hollowing ache, the crushing weight of a world that had suddenly, irrevocably lost its center. He had won the chase, but the prize had been the chase itself, and now that it was over, he was left with nothing but the silence of his victory. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the bark, not with the possessiveness of a suitor, but with the gentle reverence of a mourner. He could feel a faint, slow pulse deep within the wood, the quiet alien life of the thing she had become. And in that silent pulse, he understood, he had not been pursuing a lover. He had been pursuing an end. His arrogance had been the true monster, his desire the true poison. A single hot tear welled in his eye. It was not the salt water of a mortal. It was a drop of liquid sunlight, impossibly bright, impossibly hot. It traced a path down his perfect cheek and fell, landing on the dark mud with a soft hiss, a tiny puff of steam rising from the spot. Then came another, and another. The god who had never known sorrow, the radiant being who was the very image of divine perfection, began to weep. The sound was a ragged, unfamiliar tearing in the quiet air. His body was racked with sobs that came from a place deeper than his lungs, a place where his immortal soul had just been broken. His tears, the very essence of his light and warmth, fell freely now, watering the fresh earth around the base of the tree, soaking down to the new and tender roots of the beloved he had just lost forever. The great and terrible pride of Apollo was shattered, washed away by a sorrow as vast and all-consuming as the love that had caused it. The storm of his sorrow did not pass quickly. He remained at the foot of the tree as the sun, his own chariot, began its slow descent across the sky, its light feeling like a stranger's touch upon his skin. The violent, ragged sobs subsided, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any sound, a hollow ache where his pride used to be. The tears had stopped, but the grief remained, a new and permanent resident in his immortal heart. He looked up, his gaze tracing the lines of the slender trunk, the graceful sweep of the branches, the delicate shape of the green leaves that were once her hair. She was still beautiful. But it was the beauty of a memory, the beauty of a song he could no longer sing. The golden arrow in his heart still burned, but its fire no longer demanded possession. It demanded reverence. He rose slowly, his movements no longer filled with the sharp, certain grace of a god, but with a new, somber weight. He reached out and gently touched one of the leaves. It was cool and smooth against his fingertips, and he could feel the faint, slow thrum of life within it. She had not been destroyed. She had been preserved, saved from him in the only way she could be, and in that moment a new resolve settled over him, a vow born not of pride or conquest, but of a love that had been stripped down to its purest, most painful essence. If he could not have her, he would honour her. If she could not be his bride, she would be his symbol. He would make her name eternal, not through the songs he sang, but through the very leaves that were her new form. "You have escaped me," he whispered, his voice quiet, speaking not to the air, but to the silent, living wood. "But you will not escape my heart. Since I cannot hold you as my wife, you will be my tree. You will be the laurel. Your leaves will be woven into my hair. Your branches will adorn my lyre and my quiver. You are evergreen, and so you shall be the crown of victory. The heads of poets who sing of truth, of heroes who triumph in battle, of victors in the great games, they will all be crowned with your leaves. Your glory will become their glory, and in their fame your name, Daphne, will live forever." He gently broke off a small, slender branch, its leaves smelling sharp and clean in the twilight air. With practiced, tender fingers, he wove it into a simple circlet, the first laurel wreath the world had ever known, and placed it upon his own golden head. It was not a crown of victory, but a crown of loss, a bittersweet reminder of the nymph who had taught the god of the sun the true meaning of a shadow. Apollo did not look back. With the simple crown of green leaves resting on his golden hair, he turned away from the riverbank and walked into the growing shadows of the evening. The light that radiated from him was different now, softer, touched with a sorrow that would never truly leave him. He was still a god, but he was no longer invincible. He had learned the terrible weight of a love that could not be returned, a lesson that would echo in his music and his prophecies for all of eternity. As his light faded from the clearing, the world seemed to wake from a trance. The river Peneus, which had held its breath in a moment of divine intervention, began to flow again, its current whispering against the new roots that held its daughter fast. The birds, which had scattered in terror, returned to the branches, their evening songs a tentative, gentle melody in the cooling air. Life resumed, but the world was not the same. On the muddy bank, a new and permanent resident stood watch, the laurel tree. It remained, slender and graceful, its leaves a vibrant, living green. It stood through the searing heat of summer and the biting frost of winter, a silent monument on the edge of the moving water. Its leaves, which never fell, became a symbol. She had won. The nymph, who wanted only to be free, had found her freedom in the most permanent way imaginable, rooting herself to the one place she could not be taken from. Her will had become a physical, living thing, a testament to the power of a refusal. It was also a monument to a god's first heartbreak. The story would be told and retold, a warning about the pride of the divine and the pain of a love born of a poisoned arrow. Apollo would keep his vow, and the laurel wreath would become the most coveted prize in the mortal world, a crown not of power but of memory, a symbol of a victory that was born from a profound and terrible loss. The tree stands there still, a silent guardian of the riverbank. It offers its leaves to poets and heroes, a piece of its eternal silence to adorn their fleeting glory. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, its leaves rustle with a sound that is not quite a whisper, but not quite the simple sound of nature. It is the sound of a story that has ended, a timeless green echo of a love that could only truly be possessed in the moment it was lost forever.